The first episode begins with the protagonist, Dr. Henry Morgan, narrating his own story while he enters a subway station. After boarding the train, he notices a beautiful blonde woman sitting nearby. Judging by her chocolate, Henry greets her in Russian, which surprises her. She invites him to attend her cello performance and later for drinks. Just then, their train crashes into a stationary train, killing every single passenger. Keeping up his narration from the beginning, Henry talks about his immortal nature. It all started 2 centuries ago when Henry was a ship's doctor. After diagnosing one of the slaves with fever, he is shocked when the captain of the ship orders his men to throw the poor man overboard. Henry tries to stop them, but the captain shoots him fatally and has his body thrown into the water. Ever since, whenever Henry dies, he finds himself waking up in a large body of water, stark naked every time. This time, he emerges from the waters of the East River, after which 2 cops arrest him for being naked in public. The next morning, his only friend and confidant, Abraham, picks him up from the police station. Abe is the only one who knows about Henry's immortality. On the other hand, Detective Joe Martinez secretly abandons her one-night stand and makes her way to the subway crash site. The initial evidence suggests that the conductor had a heart attack. While searching, Joe comes across Henry's time watch, which is still ticking. She picks it up and heads to the New York City medical examiner's office to confirm the cause of death. There she meets Henry, who instantly offers her his condolences about her husband's recent death. Judging by the faded mark on her ring finger, Joe is shocked at his correct guess, but she keeps it together. Henry reveals that the conductor died due to poisoning, which now means that the case has changed from accident to murder. Just then, Henry receives an anonymous call where a mysterious man asks him how he survived the train crash while no one else survived. The caller tells Henry that he has been looking for him for a very long time and is aware of his true nature, which scares Henry, but he pretends to play it down. Henry rushes home in a panic and asks Abe to pack his belongings, as he believes he has been found out and they need to flee. Henry does not trust people with his secret because many lifetimes ago, the government found out about his condition and performed experiments on him. However, Abe stops him, convincing him to face the danger because he has been running for all his life. In the distance, we notice a portrait of Abigail, Henry's former wife, whom Henry met in a field hospital in Germany during World War II. Later, Henry goes to the morgue where his colleague Lucas gives him a sealed envelope. He is shocked to see a photo of Abigail and him from 1955. He remembers how Abigail always thought his immortality had a greater purpose. The envelope also contains his ticket from the subway and a note. Henry speculates that the anonymous guy could have caused the train crash to test Henry's immortality. Therefore, Henry asks Abe to inject him with the conductor's blood so he can figure out the poison. After being reborn and collected by Abe from the river, Henry figures out that the poison used was aconite, a very toxic and painful poison. On the other hand, Joe notices the watch in Henry's hand while going through the surveillance footage. She interrogates Henry since he never mentioned being on the train. He reassures her that he left the train before it set off and reveals that the conductor died due to aconite poisoning. Joe realizes how he wouldn't have given up the name if he were the killer. Despite thinking of him as the prime suspect, Joe decides to let him go since he was the one who figured out the actual cause of death. Back at the morgue, Henry and Lucas find the injection site behind the ear, along with a fingerprint on the conductor's neck. Henry sends the fingerprint over to Joe, which leads her to a man called Hans. Joe and Henry visit his home but find it empty. Using his sharp observation, Henry notices a dead rat and eventually finds a small greenhouse full of aconite plants. They quickly hide when they hear Hans approaching, but before they can seize him, Hans escapes by throwing an aconite beaker at Joe. They learn that Hans was a chemist and his wife died in a subway track accident at the hands of the same conductor. They find the blueprint of the Grand Central Station, where Hans is planning to exact revenge on the train companies responsible for his wife's death via an airborne attack. They rush to the station, where Hans shoots Joe. Henry tries to stop him but gets shot during the scuffle. Before Hans can release the aconite into the vent system, Henry pushes Hans and they both plummet to the ground and die. In the next scene, Joe is confused to find Henry by her hospital bed. Henry laughs it off when she mentions she saw him fall with Hans, blaming it on the morphine. Just then, he receives an anonymous call again, where the caller mentions that he is an immortal too, who witnessed the entire fall scene, and then he cuts the call. In a flashback, Henry sees a young Abigail who saves an infant from the Auschwitz camp. The infant is Abe, whom Henry raised as his son. Later, Joe comes to their antique shop and asks Henry to join him for another homicide, as she returns his watch. In the second episode, a troubled woman called Vicky asks her cab driver to let her off in the middle of a bridge, after which she falls and dies. Later, Joe and her partner Mike visit Henry, who reveals that despite the police's initial report of suicide, suicide. Vicky was actually murdered. Later that night, Henry visits the bridge and finds 2 fingerprints where Vicky jumped off. Unknowingly, he gets hit by a truck and dies. The truck driver is perplexed when he doesn't find the body. The next day at work, Lucas tells Henry that he found some skin tissue under Vicky's nails. He also tells Henry about a gift someone left at his desk. To Henry's horror, it is from the anonymous caller who mocks him about the truck accident. Abe traces the paper back to a now-closed hotel in Italy, where Henry and Abigail caught feelings for each other in 1945. Henry remembers in a flashback when he left Abigail a note before leaving her, and how she ran behind him and convinced him to stay. Back at Vicky's campus, Joe and Henry go to her professor's office. Her colleague, Paul, tells them that they were translating an ancient Latin codex. Professor James shows up and claims that he was almost ready to release a paper with Vicky. When he mentions he was on an opera date with his wife, Joe finds it suspicious since she never asked him for an alibi. Henry steals James' pen and it matches the DNA found under Vicky's nails. When they bring him in, James reveals that he was having an affair with Vicky, but he called it off. Henry believes him because that skin could have been there due to physical intimacy. Later that day, Joe informs Henry that the professor committed suicide too. When they examine the crime scene, Henry notices that James was killed by a left-handed man. While Joe and Mike comb the CCTV footage and find James's drunk wife, Henry goes to Paul and blames him for murdering both Vicky and the professor, since he felt cheated out of credit for the paper. Paul then holds a knife to his throat and tries to escape, but Joe and Mike notice them through the cameras, after which they apprehend Paul and save Henry. Later that night, Henry receives yet another anonymous call and learns that his stalker has been around for 2,000 years, who asks him to call him Adam. In the next episode, Henry reveals his research to Abe and mentions that some methods let him stay dead for longer, which means he just has to figure out the correct way to remain dead. In the next scene, a teenager steals a briefcase from an old man called Bill. Bill chases the kid and knocks him over. However, he starts vomiting blood and dies. Later at the morgue, Henry and Lucas find the 67-year-old Bill quite fit for his age. Upon examination, they figure out that the body was 30 years old while his brain was over 100 years old and quite damaged. On the other hand, Joe finds $7,000 and a business card in Bill's briefcase. She visits the crime scene with Henry, who notices a woman standing out from the crowd. They follow her into an alley and find themselves in a youth clinic, where Dr. Frederick introduces them to his youth shake. Henry walks out with a sample of the woman's shake and has a flashback of his doctor colleague in 1906 who suffered from tuberculosis and tried all cures to get better, but in vain. Joe figures out that Dr. Frederick is not a real doctor. He is actually a scammer called Harold. They find him at a pool party, and he excuses himself to dress up before talking to them. Shortly after, they hear a bang and find him dead. Later in the lab, Henry notices that prions from dead people are being used in the youth potions. He further notices that 12 bodies have gone missing all over the city. Their investigation leads them to an EMT called Anton, who claims to have killed his partner Harold. However, Henry realizes his lack of knowledge and confirms that he is not responsible for the youth shakes. Henry notices Abe's name in the list of users, but Abe assures him that he only went once. Through Abe's help, they are able to intercept Sasha, the female chemist, just before she tries to jump in front of the train. She is devastated that her drug hurt people. In the end, Henry takes Abe for skating. In the next episode, a very influential New Yorker, Gloria Carlisle, is attending a ceremony in her honor at 91 years of age. While her son Conrad gives a speech, someone follows Gloria into a dark hallway, and moments later, she is found dead. Henry sends Lucas to investigate the crime scene since he knows Gloria from his past. Gloria had been the one who inspired him to propose to Abigail. Lucas unknowingly tells a reporter that Gloria was murdered, and the news spreads like wildfire. The mayor is livid since this was supposed to be kept under wraps. Lucas writes up his resignation, but Henry decides to take the fall. In Lieutenant Joanna's office, Conrad Carlisle dismisses Henry from his mother's case. Despite everything, Joe takes Henry to the crime scene, where he concludes that Gloria was pushed from the stairs and she crawled away to this spot. Through the CCTV footage, they learn that Lance, Gloria's granddaughter's boyfriend, followed her into the dark hallway. When they bring him in, he tells them that all he wanted was Gloria's blessings for their marriage. He further says that Gloria was talking about a burning smell, which Henry assumes was due to a drug reaction. He speculates that Gloria was poisoned, but when he reaches his lab, Lucas tells him that the body has been moved to the morgue. Henry launches Abe as an antique seller into Gloria's mansion and has him take pictures of her medicines, but in vain. Later, Henry notices Conrad's hand shaking and links it to the same drug that was used on Gloria. Since Conrad had a strained relationship with his mother, the police interrogate him, and he bitterly reveals that he had been trying to get reinstated in his mother's will. which proves he couldn't have murdered her. We also learn that Gloria left everything to her nurse. Later, Lucas steals a glance at the autopsy report, which confirms Henry's theory. Joe and Henry visit Gloria's estate, where they find epilepsy medication in her car. Back at the crime scene, Henry explains that Gloria ended her life herself since she only had a few months left. She wanted to die near a painting by the man she loved, but Lance's brief meeting disrupted her timing and she couldn't make it to the portrait. The 5th episode opens with Raul, a former convict turned boxer who runs a recreational center for kids in inner New York City. 3 days later, Raul is found dead in his apartment with a heroin needle in his arm. When Henry analyzes the crime scene, he presumes that Raul was murdered. Later, he finds during autopsy that the needle never reached his bloodstream, which means he was dead before the murderer feigned a scene of drug overdose. Later that night, Henry and Lucas bring one of the rats that ate Raul's body and find a ring inside its belly. Another trainer at the rec center, Fabian, informs the police how a wealthy businessman named Tommy wanted to buy the building for his personal gains. After confirming this story with Sergio, who owns a nearby shop, Joe and Henry visit a construction site owned by Tommy, where Henry notices the same material he saw on Raul's shoes. When Joe calls Raul's phone, it rings nearby and is found buried on the site. The last call Raul made was to Tommy, so they bring Tommy in for questioning, but let him go since no loose ends are connecting him to Raul's murder. Later, Joe and Henry notice another suspect, Lou, who delivers an envelope from Tommy to the rec center. After breaking in, they find $5,000 in that envelope in Fabian's locker. Fabian confesses that he got the bribe money to convince the neighborhood to sell the rec center, but has nothing to do with Raul's death. To help the police, Fabian goes to Tommy with a wire but gets only a confession about the bribery. Later, Henry notices one of the kids, Alejandro, and realizes he knows the killer when the kid runs away upon seeing someone in front of the shop. He tries to find the kid with Joe but sees his abandoned bike. When he remembers seeing Sergio earlier, they burst into the shop and stop Sergio from killing Alejandro in the basement. Sergio escapes but is hit by an incoming truck and dies on the spot. Without the witness, the police charge Tommy with bribery, and Fabian reveals the truth to the community. In the end, Joe enjoys dinner with Henry and Abe and asks how they met. In the 6th episode, Henry unboxes a human heart sent to the precinct, which belongs to Mary Kelly, a prostitute abducted in a dark alley near a hotel she went to. Henry and Joe trace her steps, which lead them to a butcher shop where they find her remains. Henry remembers a murder investigation from the past and explains that the killer copied Jack the Ripper to the T. Just then, Henry receives a call from Adam, who tells him he is also in London and hopes they will catch Jack the Ripper this time. Henry rushes out to find Adam in the crowd, but all he finds is a burner phone on a car. Thinking of Adam as the killer, later at home, Henry goes through his old notes and figures out that the killer used a very rare surgical knife that could only be found at an antique shop. While Abe follows that trail, Henry goes to work and notices a star on Mary's body, unlike a crescent on the original victim's arm from the past. This assures him that the killer is not Jack the Ripper, and they must have gone through an old newspaper for the detailed mimicking. They head to a library and find the guy who took it out. Coincidentally, the person is at the library then, and he runs away as Joe and Henry approach him. During questioning, he reveals that he is the author of a novel called Soul Slasher, which is why he got the newspaper for details. Since many of his fans are insane, he made a run for it when he saw Joe and Henry coming his way. Meanwhile, Adam calls Henry and tells him that the killer left a clue at the murder scene. He will strike again, this time mimicking the Black Dahlia murder. A few days later, a woman is found murdered in the same way, but this time Harry looks out for the next clue and figures it out to be the way of Boston's Strangler. On the other hand, Abe manages to sneak the handbook containing details of the rare knife used to kill Mary. The police arrest Devin Bentley, who indifferently denies the murder and is actually happy that this accusation will make him famous in the Soul Slasher community. His father, Mark, brings Devin home, and Henry meets the antique shop owner, who tells him that Mark, not Devin, got that knife from her. Before Henry can call Joe, Mark stabs him and prepares to kill the shop owner. Joe arrives just in time and shoots Mark. While Henry struggles to hide his secret from Joe, Adam appears out of nowhere and slits Henry's throat, resetting his life. Episode 7 begins with Dr. Tyler Forrester killed in his home just a night after receiving an award for his humanitarian efforts. He has a strange Roman tattoo on his chest, and they learn that he cut ties with his wealthy family some years ago. At his funeral, Joe and Henry meet his high school friends. Carter is the one who presented Tyler with his award. Henry realizes Carter is lying when he asks him about a date. 10th June 2005. The date on the group photo coincides with Tyler's tattoo, and his mom reveals that Tyler went on a vacation with Paul, Carter, and Cassandra right after his high school graduation that day. When he returned, he became distant with his family. Paul tells Henry that back in high school, Tyler had a thing for Cassandra, who was Paul's girlfriend then. Later, they find a video on Tyler's laptop where he apologizes to someone named Robert, and Paul stops him. Joe and Henry visit Paul at his apartment, where he is seen almost overdosing on drugs, but Henry saves him. They also learn that Robert was a 17-year-old kid who disappeared around the same time when the group went on their vacation. Since Paul visited a gas station close to Robert's home 2 days after Tyler's funeral, Henry and Joe follow suit and meet a guy named Morris. He shows them the security camera footage where Paul and Carter get rid of a shovel in a bag in a nearby dumpster. They bring their search team and are able to locate Robert's skeleton in the woods, after which Paul, Cassandra, and Carter are arrested. As it happens, Cassandra killed Robert while drunk driving all those years ago and made everyone promise to keep it a secret. They all deny killing Tyler, who was ready to confess Robert's murder. Henry remembers Robert's uniform, which was similar to Morris's, and deduces that Morris could have been blackmailing Tyler. When they go to the gas station, Morris shoots Henry in the arm and tries to escape, but Joe apprehends him before he can shoot her. And with that, the season ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch the next videos on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.